Most people believe the gap between retiring comfortably and not retiring comfortably is an income problem. That if you could just earn more, save more, make more at the right moment, the whole thing would resolve itself. The research says something different. Economists at the University of Chicago Booth School found that the strongest predictors of long-term wealth accumulation aren't income level or financial knowledge. They're specific behavioral patterns, the way people process decisions about money when they're tired or stressed, or sitting with a number that makes them uncomfortable. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in personal finance, not what you earn, how you behave with what you earn. And here's the thing, the behaviors that separate people who retire comfortably from everyone else are almost uniformly unsexy. They don't make for impressive dinner conversation. There's no single clever move, no dramatic turning point, no moment of financial genius that changes the trajectory. There's just a set of quietly protective habits, most of which your brain would rather not do, built on one core principle. Make the right choice automatic so your brain doesn't have to fight itself every single day. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through will completely change how you see the retirement gap, and why the moves that actually work are exactly the ones that sound the least impressive. Before we get into the specific habits, let's talk about why this is hard. There's a well-documented phenomenon in behavioral economics called delayed discounting. Your brain doesn't weight future rewards and present rewards equally. It discounts the future, heavily. A dollar available right now feels worth substantially more to most people than a dollar available in 10 years, even after accounting for interest and inflation. Neuroscientists describe this not as irrationality, but as a feature of how the brain's reward circuitry evolved. The present is certain. The future is abstract. Your nervous system learned to prioritize what's in front of it. The people who retire comfortably aren't exempt from this. Their brains work the same way yours does. What's different is that their behaviors have been structured so the pull of the present doesn't get a vote in the big decisions. The system runs, the money moves, the plan holds, not because they're more disciplined, because discipline isn't required when the architecture is right. Here are the 10 moves. None of them are exciting. All of them work. The first one is automating the decision so you never have to make it. Here's the thing about willpower. It's not a character trait. It's a depleting resource. Research on decision fatigue, developed and replicated across multiple institutional studies, shows that your capacity for sound judgment degrades across the day as you make more choices. Each decision, what to prioritize at work, how to respond to a complicated message, whether to take the easier route home, draws from the same finite pool of cognitive resources. By the time a typical evening arrives, the prefrontal cortex that handles long-term planning has been running all day. The version of you deciding whether to transfer money into savings at 9 in the evening is neurologically compromised compared to the version of you who resolved that morning to save more this year. Research from Stanford on financial automation found that people who automated their retirement contributions accumulated significantly more wealth than those who managed transfers manually, even when both groups reported equal intentions to save. The intentions were the same. The architecture was different, and architecture won. What automation looks like from the inside is almost nothing. You set it up once, you feel mildly satisfied, and then you stop thinking about it. That forgetting is the feature, not the flaw. Your brain stops registering the savings as a decision requiring willpower, which means it stops being a battle you could lose on a hard Tuesday in February. The money moves before your tired brain gets a vote. The honest downside is that automation can create a false sense of completion. Set it, forget it, and never revisit it as your income grows, and you've built a system that stays exactly where it was when you were 28. The move isn't just automating once, it's building in a yearly review to increase the percentage. That part requires intention. The rest doesn't. The second move is increasing your contribution rate before you feel ready. Here's what nobody talks about when it comes to retirement savings rates. The moment you feel ready to save more is usually the moment you've already mentally spent the money. Research associated with Shlomo Benartzi and Richard Thaler's work on the Save More Tomorrow program found that employees who committed in advance to directing future pay raises toward retirement savings ended up saving significantly more over time than those who tried to increase contributions out of income they were already living on. The key variable wasn't discipline, it was timing. Future money that hasn't arrived yet, hasn't been mentally incorporated into a spending identity. You can't feel the loss of something you never had. This is loss aversion at work. One of the most replicated findings in behavioral economics developed through Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky's research. Your brain processes the pain of losing something you currently have at roughly twice the intensity of the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. When you try to redirect money you're already spending, your brain registers it as subtraction. When you redirect a raise that hasn't arrived yet, there's no baseline to subtract from. The discomfort never materializes. The savings grows anyway. What this feels like is almost nothing. A year passes. You notice your contribution rate went up. Your lifestyle didn't change. That absence of pain is the whole mechanism. The real cost of this move is that it requires trusting a future version of yourself to follow through, and for people whose relationship with money has been shaped by instability or anxiety, that trust is genuinely hard to extend. That's not weakness. That's information about where the real planning work needs to happen, and it's worth taking seriously rather than skipping past. The third move is not looking at your retirement account during market drops. This one looks like avoidance. It's actually the opposite. Research from Shlomo Benartzi and Richard Thaler on what they called myopic loss aversion found that investors who monitored their portfolios more frequently were significantly more likely to shift toward conservative, lower return allocations, not because the data supported that shift, but because seeing short-term losses felt intolerable and triggered a protective response that cost them long-term returns. Here's what's happening neurologically. Your brain isn't evaluating a 30-year investment when you open your retirement account during a downturn. It's evaluating what happened in the last 90 days. And what happened in the last 90 days looks to a nervous system like a problem that requires a solution. The solution your nervous system proposes, move to cash, protect what's left, get out, is precisely wrong for a retirement timeline. But it feels right. It feels urgent. And the more often you expose yourself to the short-term data, the more often that urgency wins. For retirement accounts with decades of runway, the information you'd get from checking during volatility isn't actionable. It's just activating. And an activated nervous system makes worse financial decisions, not better ones. Set a calendar reminder to review your allocation twice a year. Not during market turbulence, not when a headline makes you anxious. At the scheduled review, assess whether your allocation still reflects your timeline and risk tolerance. That's it. The rest is noise. Your brain isn't built to process without cost. The fourth move is keeping your retirement portfolio boring on purpose. Research from Dalbar's annual analysis of investor behavior has consistently found that the average equity investor earns significantly less than the market index they're invested in, not because they chose inadequate funds, but because they moved in and out of those funds at emotionally driven moments. The gap between what markets return and what investors actually earn exists almost entirely because of attempts to be clever. Timing the market, rotating into whatever sector is performing this quarter. Following the story that feels compelling right now. Every one of those moves feels like engagement. Most of them are expensive. The complexity your brain finds reassuring is usually the thing costing you money. A diversified allocation of low-cost index funds spread across asset classes feels unsophisticated. It lacks narrative. There's no story to tell. And that absence of story is a feature, because the most costly investing decisions almost always come wrapped in a convincing story about why this moment is different. What the people who retire comfortably often describe is this. They can't tell you an impressive story about how they built their retirement savings. There was no clever pivot, no early call on the right sector. There was a boring allocation set years ago, rebalanced annually, and largely left alone. The unsexy truth is that not doing things is one of the most financially productive activities available to a retirement investor. The downside is psychological, not financial. It's genuinely hard to feel engaged with something you've intentionally made dull. If you need the sense that you're actively participating in your own future, channel it somewhere constructive. Annual rebalancing reviews, financial planning conversations, tax strategy, not trades. The fifth unsexy move is treating your emergency fund as retirement infrastructure rather than a separate savings project. But here's what nobody tells you about why retirement plans actually fail. And it's almost never the reason people expect. Research from the Federal Reserve surveys on household financial fragility has found that the most common trigger for early retirement account withdrawals isn't a major financial emergency in the abstract. It's the absence of a liquid buffer when an ordinary disruption arrives. A job loss, a medical bill, a period of reduced income. People don't raid retirement savings because they plan to. They do it because there was nowhere else to go. Here's the thing. Your emergency fund isn't a savings product sitting beside your retirement plan. It's load-bearing retirement infrastructure. Every time a financial shock hits and you have a funded buffer, you absorb it without touching the compounding engine. Every time a shock hits without one, the cost isn't just the withdrawal penalty and the taxes. It's the compound growth you lose on that money for every year it's gone. And compound growth lost in your 30s or 40s cannot simply be replaced by contributing more in your 50s, because time is the ingredient that can't be purchased retroactively. 3 to 6 months of essential expenses in a high-yield account is the standard benchmark. The psychological security of knowing you can absorb a shock also changes who you are during one. Desperate financial decisions are expensive decisions. The emergency fund isn't just protection against the emergency. It's protection against the version of yourself who makes choices under acute financial pressure. The sixth move is not upgrading your lifestyle every time your income goes up. Here's something fascinating about the relationship between income and financial security. They don't automatically move together. Research from the National Bureau of Economic Research has found that income growth alone is a weak predictor of wealth accumulation. The stronger predictor is the sustained gap between what someone earns and what they spend. And that gap tends to close automatically as income rises, not because people consciously decide to spend more, but because the spending expands to fill the available space without deliberate permission. The psychology behind lifestyle restraint is this. Your brain is subject to hedonic adaptation, the well-documented tendency to normalize new conditions and return to a baseline level of satisfaction regardless of what changed. Every lifestyle upgrade gets incorporated into the new normal. The larger apartment no longer feels like a luxury, it feels like the floor. And once it becomes the floor, it stops generating the satisfaction it was acquired to provide, while continuing to generate the monthly cost. What this pattern feels like from inside is often described not as deprivation, but as indifference. People who maintain this habit don't typically describe resisting the urge to upgrade. They describe not feeling the pull particularly strongly. The upgrade's pitch just doesn't land with the same force. That isn't virtue. It's a specific relationship with baseline that happens to be financially protective. The social friction is real, and dismissing it wouldn't be honest. Staying in the same apartment when peers are moving to houses, driving the same car when your income has doubled, these decisions invite questions and occasionally judgment. The trade-off between present social legibility and long-term security is genuine, and it costs something. That's worth naming rather than papering over with language about being strategic. The seventh move is paying off high-interest debt before investing more broadly. Here's the thing. This one generates more internal conflict than almost anything else in personal finance, because it means pausing the investment story to do something that feels like erasing a mistake rather than building a future. Research from behavioral finance literature has found that people who carried revolving high-interest debt while simultaneously investing in retirement accounts reported higher financial anxiety, not lower, even when their net worth was technically improving. The debt felt present and immediate. The investment felt abstract and distant, and the emotional weight of the debt was degrading decision quality across their entire financial life, not just in the category labeled debt. Your brain does not process debt as a line item in a spreadsheet. For many people, it registers as a persistent background signal in the nervous system, low-grade, chronic, taxing cognitive bandwidth in ways that affect decisions you wouldn't consciously connect to money at all. Paying down high-interest debt doesn't just improve a balance sheet. It quiets that signal. And a quieter nervous system makes better long-term choices. The order of operations that tends to work behaviorally: capture any employer match on retirement contributions first, because that's an immediate return that no debt payoff can match. Then, redirect toward high-interest debt, generally anything carrying a rate above roughly 7 or 8%. Then return to broader retirement investing, not because that's the only mathematically correct sequence, but because it tends to produce the behavioral consistency that makes the whole plan hold over time. The sequence that a person actually follows is more valuable than the theoretically optimal sequence they abandon. The eighth move is having a written financial plan and almost never looking at it. And here's where it gets interesting, because the value of a financial plan is almost entirely in the making of it, not the consulting of it. Research from Vanguard's Center for Investor Research has found that households with a written financial plan accumulated significantly more wealth over time than those without one, even when both groups had similar incomes and savings rates. The presence of a plan changed behavior. Having a destination coordinates decisions that would otherwise be made independently, inconsistently, and in response to whatever emotional weather was present at the time. A written plan functions as a pre-commitment device, a behavioral economics tool that removes in-the-moment deliberation from decisions your calmer self already made. When a market drop arrives and anxiety rises, a written plan that says you hold through volatility isn't just words. It's an instruction from a prior version of yourself, made outside of emotional activation, overriding the reactive impulse of the present moment. Research on pre-commitment, developed through the work of Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein, among others, consistently shows that decisions made in advance produce better long-term outcomes than decisions made under stress. The psychology of a written financial plan is this. Its job isn't to be consulted regularly. Its job is to have been written. The clarity it forced in the making shapes hundreds of small downstream decisions you'll never consciously attribute back to it. The honest downside is that a plan written once and never revisited can become an anchor that resists necessary change. Life shifts. Circumstances evolve. A plan built for one version of your life needs updating when that version changes. The unsexy discipline isn't just writing it. It's returning to it with honesty when reality looks different than you expected. The ninth move is talking about money with your partner before it becomes a crisis. But here's what nobody tells you about one of the most reliable predictors of retirement readiness. It isn't a savings rate. Research from Kansas State University, where Dr. Sonia Britt examined the relationship between financial disagreements and relationship outcomes, found that arguments about money were a stronger predictor of relationship dissolution than disagreements about almost any other topic. And research on retirement specifically shows that couples who reach retirement without aligned financial expectations face significantly higher rates of late retirement financial difficulty, not because they didn't save enough individually, but because they were, without realizing it, saving for different lives. The psychology of financial conversations and relationships is this. They activate shame responses for most people in a way that other sensitive topics don't, revealing what you earn, what you owe, what you quietly spend, what you fear about the future. These feel like exposures. Your brain processes financial vulnerability with a threat signature disproportionate to the actual risk of disclosure, which is why most couples avoid the conversation until avoidance becomes expensive. The unsexy move is a regular, low-stakes financial check-in, not a crisis summit, not a performance review of each other's habits, a once-a-month conversation about where things stand, what changed, and what one of you might be carrying that hasn't been said out loud yet. Mildly uncomfortable on average. Quietly, one of the most protective financial habits two people can build together. The real cost here is that this habit requires emotional safety before it's genuinely useful. Forcing financial transparency before the trust exists to hold it isn't the move. Building the communication habit means building the relational foundation first, and that work is slower and messier than any spreadsheet, and it's worth treating it that way. The 10th move is getting professional financial help before you think you need it. Here's the thing. Most people save this for when something goes wrong. A job loss, a divorce, a sudden windfall, a looming retirement date that arrived faster than expected. But research from Vanguard's Advisors Alpha Analysis found that the single largest source of value a financial advisor provides isn't investment selection or tax optimization. It's behavioral coaching, the work of keeping clients from making emotionally driven decisions that undermine their own plans during periods of market stress or personal disruption. But here's what nobody talks about. The people who benefit most from professional financial guidance are often not the ones who don't understand money. They're the ones who understand it well enough to build sophisticated justifications for emotionally driven decisions. Your brain will construct a compelling case for why this particular moment is the exception, why the market is different this time, why the purchase makes sense right now, why the withdrawal is temporary. A good advisor's job is partly to notice when your intelligence is in service of your anxiety rather than your actual goals. Getting help during the boring, stable years, not the turbulent ones, means the relationship already exists when turbulence arrives. The plan is already built, the behavioral guardrails are already in place. You're not calling someone for the first time in a state of stress and asking them to reconstruct your financial picture from scratch while you're activated. You're not undisciplined for needing external accountability on financial decisions. The prefrontal cortex that makes rational long-term plans and the amygdala that responds to threat are both parts of the same nervous system. Professional guidance isn't an admission of failure. It's an acknowledgement that financial decisions happen inside an emotional human body, not inside a model. Now let's talk about what all of this actually means, because when you look at these 10 moves together, they don't all look like advantages. Some of them look like anxiety management. Some look like delayed enjoyment. Some look like the constant suppression of the present in service of a future that isn't here yet. And that observation is accurate. None of these habits are purely positive. The automation that protects your savings can become a set-and-forget posture that misses real changes worth responding to. The restraint that keeps your lifestyle from inflating creates genuine social friction and real questions about whether you're actually living the life you're building toward. The forward thinking that makes you fund an emergency account and write a financial plan and talk about money before it becomes a crisis. That same orientation can make it hard to feel secure even when you objectively are. These patterns come with a cost. That cost is worth naming. And here's what's honest about the person who spends freely as income grows, who lives fully in the present, who finds the idea of delay, discounting awareness, exhausting, and the 10 habits on this list mildly grim. That person is not doing anything wrong. They are making a real choice with real value, present experience is real. Connection and enjoyment and the texture of daily life are real. The trade-off between current experience and future security isn't a moral question. It's a personal one, with legitimate answers on both sides. What the research actually shows is that retirement readiness is less about discipline and more about behavior architecture. The people who retire comfortably are not stronger or more virtuous. Their systems are better aligned with how human brains function under conditions of stress, competing desires, and the chronic pull of the present. And behavior architecture is something you can build. It looks different at 30 than it does at 45 than it does at 58. Yeah, but the moves are always available. It's never so late that the boring habits stop mattering. The real insight isn't picking the right move from this list and executing it flawlessly. It's understanding why your brain resists these moves and then building the external structure that makes the resistance irrelevant. You don't need to feel motivated to automate your contributions. You need to set up the transfer. You don't need to feel ready to talk to a financial advisor. You need to book the appointment. The feeling follows the structure, not the other way around. If you watch this and recognize yourself in some of these patterns, if you're already automating contributions or keeping your portfolio boring or having the money conversations before they become urgent, that recognition is worth something. But don't let it tip into a different kind of pressure. These habits carry real weight. The forward thinking that makes you financially prepared can also make it hard to enjoy what you've built. Make sure you're letting yourself inhabit the present you're working so hard to protect. And if these moves feel foreign, if retirement feels too abstract to motivate you, if saving feels like subtraction, if the whole list feels like a description of a life you don't want, you're not broken, you're not undisciplined. Your brain is processing time and reward in a completely ordinary way. These moves don't require you to rewire your psychology, they require you to build systems that root around it. One automated transfer is enough to start. If this changed how you're thinking about the gap between where you are and where you want to be, drop a comment and tell me which move you're making first. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. This channel is created for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended to replace professional psychological, medical, financial, or therapeutic advice. Always consult with a professional.